Thank you everyone for joining. We are here to talk about the AWS IAM Access Analyzer. My name is Ujjwal Pugalia. I'm a senior product manager in the AWS Automated Reasoning Group. Um, and yeah, Access Analyzer, for those who don't know, was launched last year at reInvent 2019. So we've been around for almost about 3 months now. And it is a feature within the Identity and Access Management Service, which is IAM, and I'm going to talk and dive deeper into it. All right, so what are we going to do today? We're starting with a crash course into the AWS IAM Access Analyzer. I'll talk about uh, who, when, and why to use this feature of IAM. Then talk about how do we get started. I'm going to take a risk and actually do a live demo and do a live console walkthrough. So bear with me there, and then we'll essentially start, and then we'll talk about is how IAM Access Analyzer compares to other policy evaluation tools that are out there already. I'm going to end by giving you a sneak peek into our next big launch that is upcoming, and then open it up to Q&A at the end, where Dan, who's on me on this session, would also help with the Q&A. All right, so let's talk about the IAM Access Analyzer, and I think a very good way of doing that would be to talk about what IAM Access Analyzer is and is not. So let's start with what Access Analyzer is. So the IAM Access Analyzer is a monitoring and reporting tool which does resource-centric policy evaluations, and by doing these evaluations, it essentially identifies supported resources that allow public or cross-account access from outside an AWS account. How the Access Analyzer reports these is in the form of findings, and you will see some of these play out as I do the console walkthrough later in this presentation. So talking about what IAM Access Analyzer is not. So the IAM Access Analyzer is not a mechanism to grant additional permissions. It does not, as I mentioned, it is resource centric, so it does not evaluate principal centric policies. And what I mean by those are policies that you would attach to your IAM roles or users directly to give them permissions to a specific resource. IAM Access Analyzer is different in the sense that it does not use log analysis or pattern matching techniques. It uses a technique called automated reasoning, and I'll get into that later. And finally, it does not provide you with like auto remediating of policies or automatically changing policies or working on findings. It is a monitoring and reporting tool that provides you with findings and allows you to take actions on them. All right, so now that we've established on a high level what IAM Access Analyzer is and is not, let's talk about who should be using the IAM Access Analyzer feature. So I generally like to categorize people who would find IAM Access Analyzer useful into two personas. People who are concerned about least privilege or work in the area of providing least privilege to their users, or security conscious customers who are particular about security and who can access what resources. And hopefully for the people on the call, you either fall into one of these buckets. And I think generally knowing and talking to AWS customers, it's essentially everyone who can gain from this feature. So now that we've established that anyone can essentially use this feature, let's talk about when should you use the IAM Access Analyzer. And I wanted to talk about shared resources. There are a lot of resources that AWS provides that can be shared through resource-based policies. That means that, as in policies that are attached to these resources allow access to principals outside the account. I've just listed 14 of the ones off the top of my head, but I can assure you there are more. So over time, what customers have started doing is started using accounts as boundaries and scaled and has started scaling with multiple accounts. And there are valid use cases for customers to use to provide access to resources in one account to principals that exist in other accounts. For example, there might be a centralized audit account that you have that needs access to a bunch of resources in a specific account for a project. There might be a website account that needs access to API gateway in a separate project. But during the times when you or someone in your team is making these configurations, there are chances that that they might introduce or you might introduce a misconfiguration that provides access which is not intended. And that is essentially when you should be using Access Analyzer to catch such misconfigurations and identify resource access outside of your account that is unintended or against your security policies. All right, so why use Access Analyzer specifically? So the first thing is that Access Analyzer continuously monitors resources in your account and identifies public or cross-account access, which means anytime there is a new resource created or a new policy attached to your resource, Access Analyzer continues monitoring for these changes and reevaluates these policies to provide new findings. Access Analyzer also uses automated reasoning, which is a form of mathematical and logical inference. It's a cognitive science that helps you, that allows it to access or determine all access paths and provides the highest levels of security assurance, which means you get comprehensive findings with lower false negatives and false positives. Finally, you can use Access Analyzer to resolve or archive findings based on your security requirements. If you identify sharing that is unintended, you can resolve it by fixing the policy. Or if the sharing is intended, Access Analyzer will still report that as a finding, and you can archive it so that you don't see that in your list of active findings. And if none of those reasons really intrigue you, then you should still try it anyways, because it is available for free. It is a free feature of IAM, so you should definitely test it out and see if it solves your use cases. All right, so now that I've established who should use Access Analyzer when and why you should use Access Analyzer, let's talk about how do you get started. So you've done most of the work already by creating resources in an account and adding resource-based policies to allow sharing with other accounts. As I mentioned, some of it might be intended and some might not be intended. So in order to get started with Access Analyzer, the only thing that you need to do is create an analyzer. The analyzer is a resource for IAM Access Analyzer, and as soon as you create an analyzer for your account, it starts generating findings which tell you who has access to what. And these findings can be used by administrators of the account or security teams to ensure that only the right people have access to your resources from outside of your account. So one of the concepts that I would want to explain for Access Analyzer is this concept of a zone of trust. The zone of trust is essentially the scope of the analysis for a specific analyzer. So in the workflow I just shared with you, the account in which you created the Access Analyzer was your zone of trust. And how you can think of it is any principal or resource that is within the account or the zone of trust is considered trusted. So an IAM role within the account having access to an S3 bucket within the same account will not be reported as a finding because it is trusted, whereas an account outside having access to an S3 bucket, for example, within the account will be reported as a finding because it is a standalone account that is not in this AWS account. All right, so a few things to remember while you are creating the analyzer. Uh, that IAM Access Analyzer is a regional feature, which means you will have to create an analyzer in each of the regions where you would want to identify resources. So the findings are generated in a region by the analyzer for resources that are created in that region. So IAM Access Analyzer only allows and one analyzer to get created when the zone of trust is your account, and that is what we allow currently. And so essentially, in summary, you would basically create one analyzer per region in an account. So let's say if you have resources in 16 different commercial regions within the same AWS account, you would have to create 16 analyzers, one in each region. All right. So one of the questions that might arise would be, how do I create analyzers in all of my accounts? And there are multiple ways that you can do that. You can either use the IAM console and the region selector on the IAM console to flip through different regions and create an analyzer in each of the regions, and use the IAM console for creating analyzers in different accounts as well. We basically have public APIs to do whatever you can do on the IAM console through our APIs as well. So you can script against the public APIs to create analyzers in across multiple accounts and regions. Finally, we also launched with support for AWS CloudFormation. So there are CloudFormation templates already existing that help you create multiple analyzers in each of your accounts and regions. Now that you have created these accounts or these analyzers in the accounts, let's talk about where all can you see your findings. So one way of looking at it is through the console. The IAM console provides a centralized view of all findings across resources that are supported by IAM Access Analyzer. As I mentioned, whatever you can do on the console, you can also achieve through public APIs. So we have APIs to get a list of findings or to get a specific finding, and you can use those. We also have an integration with CloudWatch events. So we will provide an event for any time there is a status change on a specific finding. So a new finding gets generated, or a resolved finding gets deleted, or there is a status change when a finding gets marked from active to archived, or from active to resolved, or archived to resolved. All of these changes are emitted in the form of CloudWatch events that you can consume and use IAM Access Analyzer in that fashion. All right, so we also have integrations with other service consoles, and the goal really is for specific users or users with a specific persona to be able to get information provided by IAM Access Analyzer closer to where they're taking the action. So one of the examples is the Amazon S3 console. You might have seen on the side nav in the S3 console, there is an option called Access Analyzer for S3, and essentially it uses IAM Access Analyzer as an input to provide you by highlighting buckets that allow either public access or cross-account access, and helps you remediate on the same page by using S3 features such as block public access or you can also use the S3 console to update bucket policies or ACLs and resolve these findings. The second service console integration that we've launched is the AWS Security Hub console integration, where instead of providing you with a bunch of findings, we have aggregated findings into a single finding per resource. That tells you whether the resource allows for public access or cross-account access. You can always the purpose here is to alert your security teams whenever there is new access or a new resource allows access, so that they can be aware and use that and generate next steps based on that alert. You can always go from the Security Hub console to the IAM Access Analyzer console to view what set of findings resulted in that one specific finding on Security Hub, if you want more details. And we've also launched a bunch of integrations with AWS Partners at launch. So all of these partners that you see on the list here are using the findings generated by IAM Access Analyzer as inputs for a variety of different use cases based on the products that they have. For example, there are partners using IAM Access Analyzer as an input for threat mitigation or incident response, or even just for providing more visibility or like an overall status of your bucket, for example. We're really excited to have launched with so many partners. And again, these are the partners that we've actively collaborated with. All of our APIs are public, so there might be more partners who are currently working on adopting IAM Access Analyzer as an input source. All right. So now that I've given you sort of a crash course on the IAM Access Analyzer and how it works and how do you get started, I'm going to go on a limb and try to do a live demo, and let's hope that it all works out. I'm going to do this in a set of two demos. So the first one is on the IAM console. I'm going to start with creating an analyzer with the account as the zone of trust. I will review the active findings generated by the analyzer and archive some of the findings that I see as intended. I will also resolve some findings that I think are unintended. All right, so this is the IAM console. I'm just logged in as with an IAM role. So here you see on the left-hand nav Access Analyzer, and this is essentially the feature homepage. We've provided a workflow similar to what I've explained of how to use the IAM Access Analyzer and some benefits on here. But let's get started by creating the analyzer. So as you can see, I'm currently in US East North Virginia. This is the region. We also let you know that you have to create an analyzer in each of the regions where you have resources. We provide you with a default name, but you can always change this based on your preference. As I mentioned, you see the zone of trust for the analyzer, which is my current account right now. And analyzer supports tags. So if you want to add tags to the analyzer, you can do that. For the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to go ahead and create an analyzer. Just as additional information, we do use a service linked role that grants the analyzer permissions to interact with the resources and evaluate policies on your behalf. Okay, so let's get started. It takes around about, I guess, 30 seconds for the analyzer to be created, but you'll start seeing findings. So let's hope this all works. As you can see, I've started getting a bunch of findings here. So I'll just let this finish, and once the analyzer is created, I'm going to go through and review some of the findings. All right, let's see. Okay, so the analyzer creation is complete. It is successfully created. I see the last time that a scan ran for this analyzer was a few seconds ago, of course, because it was created a few seconds ago. Let me go and just give you a quick glance of the findings. So as you can see, the findings are associated to a bunch of different resources. I see IAM roles here, S3 buckets, um, Lambda functions, for example, and it tells you essentially what resource in the account can be accessed by what external principal. So in this case, let me take a better example. So in this case, this S3 bucket called reinvent 2019 orange can be accessed by any principal, which comes in under with this source IP as the condition. And we also give you an access level. So this basically tells you the level of access that a principal can have on your resource and help you prioritize some of your findings. So I see here that read access is allowed to any principal who comes through this source IP on this reinvent orange bucket, and the finding was last updated 2 minutes ago. So let me go ahead and filter some of the findings so that I can look at this bucket in more detail. I just used a filter for orange because that's what I saw here. So I see there are two findings, one of which is a read and the other one has a bunch of findings in here. So let me go and look at it in more depth. So I'm going to click on the finding ID, and what it gives me is essentially a bunch of information about the sharing. So it gives me a link to the resource that I can use when I'm looking to resolve the finding. It gives me that the finding is currently active. It also enlists the conditions under which the finding is enabled. So as I can see, any principal that comes in through this source VPC will have a bunch of different permissions, and the list keeps going on to my bucket. And I don't want that. I see this as unintended. So if you see here in terms of the next steps on the same console, it tells you what you can do. If it is intended access, you can archive the finding. If it is not intended, you can go to the S3 console and resolve the finding. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the S3 console and try to resolve this finding. So I just click on this tab and it takes me to the S3 console, to that specific bucket. Once I'm here, let me go and look at the bucket policy. So as you can see, there were two findings and I have two statements here. And this is the VPC finding that I was working with. Just given the time, I'm going to use a quick fix, but you would need to update the policy based on what you want the policy to do. For now, I'm just changing the allow to a deny to show you how Access Analyzer reevaluates this policy. So I'm going to save that. Okay, so now that the policy is denied, let me go back to IAM Access Analyzer. There it is. So I go back to IAM to Access Analyzer. So as I mentioned, IAM Access Analyzer continues to monitor your resources. It generally takes around about 20 minutes or so to automatically update uh, your finding once you have had a change. Let's see. So in this case, I'm going to go to this finding. The alternative there to, like, in this case, basically, because I know that I made the change to the finding, I can manually just rescan the finding or wait for the automatic scan to trigger, which should ideally resolve this finding because the sharing doesn't exist anymore. Um, for the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to click on rescan. As you see, it is rescanning. And yeah, so Because I have resolved the finding by changing the allow to deny, it goes and resolves the finding. Let me go back to findings and again look at this specific bucket. Yeah, so as you can see now, I see only one finding here. And if I go to the resolved findings, I will see the other finding for the VPC with the status resolved. All right, so coming back to active findings, let me actually go and resolve this finding as well, because this is something that I don't want. And I'm just going to do, actually, let me say, just for the purpose of this, because it is a read permission and it is not write, and I'm okay with that because it's specific to an IP, I'm going to just archive the finding. So it says the finding is archived. It gives me a success message saying the finding was archived. And if I go back and I look at active findings again for this specific resource, I will see that there are no active findings anymore. And there are, one of my findings is archived, the other one is resolved. All right, so this is essentially the first demo, which is how do you get started by just creating the analyzer with one click, which is just saying create analyzer. I fixated on one particular resource and then showed you how to archive or resolve a specific finding. The goal or how you should be looking at the analyzer workflow is there are still a bunch of findings. So you can either look at them, use the filters and look at only the resources that you care about, or essentially go through this list one by one and resolve or archive all the findings based on whether they're intended or not. And then finally you will be left with 0 active findings. And since Access Analyzer continues to monitor the findings, you will see new active findings keep coming along over time. And then you can just focus on those findings and decide whether you want to archive or resolve them with time. All right, so this was the first demo. I also want to show you a second demo. One of the things that I had mentioned was the fact that you can see a service console integration in the S3 console that helps you highlight public buckets versus buckets that allow cross-account access and take action in the S3 console itself. So in this second demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to view all the S3 buckets in US East 1 that allow access from outside the account. I'm going to go and see what is an easy way to view the associated findings in IAM Access Analyzer with respect to a specific bucket instead of filtering them on the Access Analyzer side. And then I'm also going to do an experiment and show you how the findings on the IAM Access Analyzer side of it is coordinated with the findings or the information that are showed on the S3. All right, so I'm back here. Let me go to the S3 console. All right, so as I mentioned, there is an Access Analyzer for S3 feature here that I'm going to click on. I need to make sure I'm in the same region. I can select other regions if I want, but for this demo, I'm going to stick to US East 1. So as you can see, I get an information bar that tells me that there are no public buckets, which is good. I do not want any public buckets in S3 unless it is for a very specific reason that I want to share this publicly. Let's go and look at buckets with access to other accounts, including third-party accounts. These are all the buckets that allow cross-account access. So what is interesting here is you will see that this orange bucket that I was working with previously in the IAM Access Analyzer console currently has the status as archived. This is because all the associated findings with regards to this orange bucket are either already resolved or have been archived, which I showed in the previous demo. So for this demo, let me look at this reinvent blue bucket. So it says it currently has active findings. Let me go and see what these findings are. So at least on the S3 side, if you're a storage admin, you know that this bucket is shared through the bucket policy and currently is actively shared with other accounts. So in order to see the findings, I will select the bucket and click on view findings. So the view findings actually takes me to the active findings and automatically applies this filter. So I can see findings specific to only that blue bucket. And as I can see, there are two findings. Just for the purpose of this demo, I am going to just mark them both as archived. And you can see that the effect is almost instantaneous. I'll just refresh. So as soon as I refresh, ideally the status for this access should move to archived. There you go. So as you can see, the blue bucket is now archived. You can also archive or mark the findings as active. So you can essentially work with all S3 specific findings in the S3 console itself, and you don't need to go necessarily to the IAM console unless you want more information about like the specific accounts that you are sharing the bucket with. Okay, and obviously there are filters, so you can look at only the archived, or you can look at all the buckets together. So although I don't have a public bucket, one of the things that I mentioned that I wanted to share is we give you this option of block all public access on the same page in the access analyzer for S3. So all you need to do is if you do have a public bucket, you can choose it and block all public access, which immediately remediates the public access provided by the bucket. And the corresponding findings also get resolved both on the S3 side as well as on the IAM side. All right, so now that we have completed the demo, I'm going to talk about or essentially compare IAM Access Analyzer with other tools that are existing. So I call these traditional tools, which is a sort of a generalization. But what I've seen over time is that most of the policy evaluation tools out there, you can be broadly categorized into either using log analysis or using pattern matching techniques to provide you with findings or insights into what your policy allows. Access Analyzer is radically different from such tools because it uses automated reasoning to detect all access paths. So it actually uses a mathematical approach of ensuring or determining all access paths before providing you with comprehensive findings. Another difference is for most of the tools that are out there, uh, they allow you to do a very targeted analysis. So you need to specifically enter a policy or a specific resource in order to generate findings or finding equivalents for those tools. But IAM Access Analyzer continuously keeps evaluating. So as soon as you make any changes to a policy for a supported resource, Access Analyzer gets notified of the change and reevaluates to keep your findings up to date. And you can use those findings to know the current state of the sharing for that resource. Because it uses automated reasoning versus the log analysis or pattern matching techniques, Access Analyzer provides findings that are more comprehensive with lower false negatives and false positives as compared to the other tools. Let me give you an example. So if you have a tool, for example, that uses log analysis, it will provide you with findings only when a specific access has occurred, because that's the only time when it gets logged, right? When someone when an unintended actor gets access to a resource. Similarly, for pattern matching use cases, the scope is limited to the patterns that are known to the tool. So if there is a new policy, um, new condition or something added that has not been accounted for in pattern matching, um, the to pattern matching tool would not be able to analyze for it. But IAM Access Analyzer natively understands the IAM policy language and provides comprehensive findings based on continuous analysis. So I've mentioned this term called automated reasoning a couple of times during my presentation, and I wanted to provide a little more information about it because that's at the core of how we power the IAM Access Analyzer and the differentiator for this tool. Um, you can think of automated reasoning as a cognitive science or an art, really, of evaluating using essentially mathematical inferences and proving techniques that have traditionally been used in history to prove theorems such as the Pythagoras theorem. And what AWS has done, it's basically hired a bunch of experts in this field and asked them to solve real problems. And over time, what the automated reasoning group has achieved is it started with solving properties of internal code, right? Like crypto protocols internally or specific properties of systems within AWS. And with Access Analyzer and other, hopefully other tools in the future, we are looking to externalize this so that our customers can reap the benefits of such a technology. The initiative that we're using of using automated reasoning to provide a higher level of security assurance is called Provable security. And the goal for our the goal that we envision for our customers is to not just be secure, but provably secure by using automated reasoning proving theorems and techniques. All right, I'm going to talk now about how the IAM Access Analyzer works and sort of the journey that we used to get here. Um, and it all begins with this policy evaluation tool that we had created called Zelkova. So Zelkova is a very raw policy evaluation tool that essentially takes in a policy and a question as an input and provides a yes or no answer. So the policy could be an identity policy, could be a role trust policy, different types of resource policies like the S3 bucket policy. And the questions could be very specific as long as they are of the yes no format. So can Alice launch EC2 instances? Is my bucket accessible outside of VPC ABC? So they need to be specific yes no questions. And Zelkova basically uses automated reasoning, or what I'll call as fancy math, to essentially evaluate the policy based on the question and provide a yes no answer. So for those of you who want to get into the details of what this fancy math really is, we have a bunch of content available for you to dive deeper. There is a blog on how AWS uses automated reasoning that talks about Zelkova. And for the people who want to go even deeper, there is a scientific research paper that we've published that talks about very in-depth use of SMT solvers and theorem proving semantic-based automated reasoning to solve Zelkova use cases for access policies. What we realized is that because Zelkova takes a policy and a question, there is a very nuanced sort of approach of creating the right question, because Zelkova is pretty raw. And as long as you ask it a yes or no question, it will give you a yes or no answer. But you really need to make sure that the question you ask is appropriate for and appropriately represent your use case. So there's a journey of how we went about deciding sort of who asks the questions and who can ask the right questions. Um, Starting with reaching out to some of our enterprise customers that had resources where they took Zelkova and essentially converted their security properties into Zelkova questions. And there have been, in past reInvents and other summits, there have been bunch of these sessions that customers have. They're all on YouTube for reference, but they've talked about how they've used Zelkova. And while that approach worked for these specific set of customers, we found that their use cases were very specific and none of those could be generalized for general consumption of Zelkova as it is. So the next thing that we did was we said if these enterprise customers are able to create the right questions for their use cases, can we work with the AWS professional services to create a template of Zelkova checks or Zelkova based checks? And while that was successful to like basically work with it with professional services and achieve use cases for certain enterprise use cases, again we found that it was really hard to create questions that were generalizable and solves policy evaluation use cases for all of our customers or for a majority of our customers. The next thing that we did was we integrated with existing services like S3 to provide features such as the public badge that you see on the S3 bucket console that uses Zelkova under the hood to determine whether a bucket is public or not. It is similar to how Zelkova is used in IAM Access Analyzer to distinguish between publicly accessible and resources and resources that can be accessed from other accounts. So that worked really well because we were able to we had ownership of the question that we were asking. We were able to fine tune the question to solve a specific use case for essentially all of our customers, all of our S3 customers. So the next approach that we took was to create config rules or managed config rules for S3 based on Zelkova as well. And that also really worked really well because even in this case, we were sort of in control of how to ask the right nuanced question. At this point, we decided to go broader and see if we could just launch Zelkova as in its raw form and see how customers react to it. So we started a private beta, and what we realized is that Zelkova is very high touch, and only a few customers could even use it in the way that we expected them to use it, but it was nowhere near a place where we could publish or publicly make it available for general consumption. So essentially, after trying all of these methods, we found out that like the thing that worked the best for us in order to provide a solution that was more generalizable and provides richness and goodness to a bunch of our customers was that we do it ourselves and like write our own questions. And for our customers to not put too much resources or energy into thinking about the right questions, but just consume the benefits of us catering specific questions to specific use cases. And that's what we did with Access Analyzer essentially. So if you look at a policy, this is an example policy. What customers were really asking of us was, or really asking us to simplify was this notion of looking at the policy and saying, is this policy what I intend? And anyone who doesn't have an expertise in the IAM policy language, it is really hard to actually say yes or no just by looking at the policy. Because there is a lot of nuances in here. There's a bunch of principles. They can take a bunch of actions on specific resources under specific conditions, and it's not straightforward because there are allow effects and deny effects that the policy allows, that the policy language allows for. So what we did essentially was we said, hey, can we create yes or no questions from this policy that Zelkova can answer? And in order to do that, all we needed to do was separate out these parts or constructs of the policy into three different groups: the who, the action or what access, and the what, right? So we could separate those out and say who has access to what and fill in the blanks with the policy in question. And so we asked Zelkova, so these are all, if you notice, yes or no questions based on figuring out one principle, one action, and one resource from each of these blocks. And by asking these questions as a combination or different combinations that are available, we could ask these yes or no questions to Zelkova one by one. And based on the answers where we got a yes, we could decide or convert a complex policy into an easier to understand finding that answers the question who has access to what. So essentially, to reiterate, what we did was we looked at the policy and dissected it into a bunch of questions and fed it to Zelkova, and it gave us a bunch of like a string of yes or no answers. And that's how we created IAM Access Analyzer and that's how it works under the hood. An analogy that we like to use is it's like a 5-year-old looking at a grocery basket of different stuff and asking a bunch of questions. So are we having French toast? Are we having milk? Are we having fruits? And all of these are yes or no questions that Zelkova understands. And at the end, it gives you a yes or no answer based on that. And then you get to your finding, which is the dessert at the end. And essentially, coming back to what our customers really wanted was to look at the policy and say, is this what I intended? And what we realized is each customer has a different use case. So this policy might be something that Bob intended, but might not be something that Alice intended. So we can't really answer this question generally and apply it to each customer. So we decided to not be opinionated and just provide the facts. And the fact is that based on this policy, there is a finding where 1, 2, 3 has get object access to a specific my bucket under the source VPC condition. And we allow customers to then look at this finding and say, and basically Bob can say, oh, this is intended, that's fine. Or Alice can say, oh, this is not intended, I'm going to revoke this access because this does not meet my use case. All right, so we're coming towards the end. And I wanted to talk more about or give you a sneak peek into what is next. Now that you know what IAM Access Analyzer is, what it does, how do you use it, how do you get started, and how it works, even how it works under the hood, what's next? So we are really excited that coming really soon, we are going to launch org level or organization level analyzers. This is an integration with the AWS organization service, which helps you manage multiple accounts as a group. So what this means is instead of creating just analyzers with account as the zone of trust, you will now be able to create an analyzer with your entire organization as a zone of trust. And what this helps to do is that all resources within all the member accounts of that organization will be continuously monitored. Because the organization is your zone of trust, any principal or resources within the organization are trusted by default. Principles that are outside the organizations will be deemed external. So you will also have reduced number of findings because we will only give you findings when someone from outside of your entire organization has access to a resource within your organization, and it could be any part of your organization where that resource belongs. Um, we've also got feedback and learned from our launch, and we now allow you to create multiple organization level analyzers. And the use case there is that there are different customers that have different personas working on the same account or on the same security centric account. So we allow you to create multiple analyzers and set different archive rules. So there might be customers, there might be a specific persona that only cares about S3 buckets and might archive findings related to all other resources. Whereas, let's say an IAM administrator might only focus on IAM roles and archive findings for all other resources. And that's how multiple analyzers would help. Um, we are also really excited to be pioneering the first of multiple delegated administration features that we have launched in coordination with the AWS organizations team. What this means is, in addition to creating org level analyzers in your organization's master account, we will also allow you to choose a member as a delegated administrator. Um, and that member and you'll use the master account to create that, to choose the delegated member. But once you've chosen a delegated member, that member will have essentially org master like privileges for Access Analyzer. um, and they will be also able to create, you will be able to create an org level analyzer in your delegated member account instead of having to use your master account to get findings across your entire organization. The other benefit is that even the org level analyzers is free. So you will be able to create org level analyzers free of charge when it is launched. There are some caveats though of what is a part and what is not a part of our upcoming launch. We decided to phase our launch or integration with organizations. So in the launch that is upcoming, you will be able to create organization level analyzers, but you would not be able to create OU level analyzers or analyzers with OUs as your zone of trust. That is a part of our roadmap, and we are planning to launch it soon. But that will not be a part of our first launch with orgs. Also, Access Analyzer would still be a regional feature. So in order to get, even though you're creating an analyzer for your organization, it does not automatically aggregate findings across all regions in the organization. It is still regional, so you will have to create an analyzer in an org level analyzer in each of your regions where you have resources within that org. All right, so before I open this up to questions, just wanted to summarize what we've learned today. So you can create or you can start using IAM Access Analyzer for free with a very few clicks through the console, the API, or by using CloudFormation templates that are available. Once you start using Access Analyzer, it uses automated reasoning and provides comprehensive findings for all the resources that we support. We support 5 resources today, which are S3 buckets, IAM roles, Lambda functions and layers, KMS keys, and SQS queues. And we are looking to add support for more resources as we continue to scale. So Access Analyzer generates findings using automated reasoning for any resource that allows access from outside the zone of trust. Today, you can create an analyzer with only the account as your zone of trust, but very soon you should be able to create an analyzer with the entire organization as your zone of trust. With that, I have Dan Peebles from my team on the call as well, and we would open it up to questions. We also see some questions in the chat, and we will pick a few of them and discuss them as well.